Back with the market right here on ET now, still lying quiet. 11,950 is where we're currently at. The good thing is that the breath has managed to actually recover, at least within the F&O universe. And now you've got the advances which are taking over. It's really cement all the way, starting off with Ramco, Ultratech Cement, Ambuja, Shree Cement. The entire pack is moving forward, along with the Lupin as well, which is holding out very smartly. From within the Nifty, there's ITC, there's Bharti, there's Asian Paints, DRL, HDFC Life and Eicher Motors also, which are springing up as we speak. Lots of losers as well. ICICI Bank is a big drag, that's down 2.25%. SBI is down, Axis is down, IndusInd is down. So banks and financials, yet again, they're the ones which are taking a back seat. But with the Mumbai blackout yesterday still fresh in our minds, let's dissect the prospects of what's really happening with the power sector. Lots of talking points here, with Discoms incurring major losses, that being a very big concern, addressing the operational issues, privatization of power Discoms, whether that could be a viable option. To discuss all these questions, we have with us Anil Razdan, the former power secretary, also joining in Debashish Mishra from Deloitte India. Gentlemen, morning, good to have you both on the show. Mr. Razdan, if I could kickstart the discussion with you, because you've been associated with the sector for a very, very long time and perhaps understand the developments and the dynamics best. Where do you think has it moved from its nascent stage? And in your opinion, what have been the key successes made in the power sector so far? And where do you think we're headed in that direction?
Well, we've come a long way in the power sector since I was associated with it first at the state level, then at the center in 2 stints as joint secretary and then as a secretary. And we were woefully short on power, and our big problem that time was to add capacity somehow, and with the looming sanctions against us that we are contributing to global warming. So we went post-haste and added a lot of capacity, and that I think has come aboard. But I would straight away say that the core issue today is something which I had written about maybe a decade back, that do we want a powerful India or do we want a powerless India? I think I am drawing an unfortunate comparison, a contemporaneous comparison with COVID times. And I would say that the distribution sector is a pandemic for the power sector, which has landed the power sector in the ICU. I think COVID-19 is some kind of an attendant comorbidity for the ailing distribution sector. I'd say that the attending physicians are the power regulatory commissions who largely failed us. If they fail to administer the appropriate treatment, which has been overdue for long, it would surely lead to the collapse of the system with disastrous consequences for India, not only in the power sector, but also, I would say, in the financial sector. Because the financial losses of Discoms have surged 83% in FY19, that is before COVID came in. So anybody trying to say that COVID is responsible for the problems, no. The problem was already there, looming large. As I said, it was a pandemic affecting both the generation and also possibly the financial sector, and I would say the transmission sector in some way, but though not substantially. So I would say that the time has come now to take a bold view and take the nation into confidence, because one of conferences with correspondent A or correspondent B and announcements of the government will not do. I was with the Power Ministry when the the present act was brought into force, and I know the amount of consultations which went in. The experts can only provide the inputs for the technical parameter, what needs to be added. But ultimately, it is the people who have to accept it. And when the whole document was ready, before it was taken to Parliament, we had approached every district in the country with 3 kinds of meetings. And I think the Power Minister at that time, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, still remembers that episode. But the time has come now that the regulators have to be told that the reins of the administration of the sector have passed on to you. And unfortunately, you failed in your task. They are sitting secure in statutory jobs with secure salaries, whereas the customers do not yet have a quality assurance of supply. And those who have lent money to these distribution companies or the GENCOs, whose overdues rather, have reached 1,30,000 crores today. And maybe sometime later, I would discuss one particular state, which is the largest state in the country, which is quite illustrative of what is happening across the distribution sector. Hello.
Mr. Razdan. But Debashish, if I could get you in on the discussion, in the last 7 years, one has seen 3 bailouts actually extended to state electricity boards. There was FRB, there was Uday 2. When can this really end? Because, the deteriorating finances, no incentives to improve, spoiling the entire sector dynamics. How is it that you're reading the entire scenario right now?
Yeah, even before that, we used to have Montex in committee and all that. So it comes back every now and then, every 3-4 years, the problem accumulates and there will be a need for a, bailout. And that the basic problem is the structural issue. One is that we have failed to achieve cost-reflective tariffs, despite several attempts in past. And what has happened is, if you look at agriculture plus losses, almost 45%, in some states up to 50% of the power goes to segments which is not, paying back anything. So both agriculture plus losses is a big drag, and often states declare subsidy and don't really pay to the Discoms. So one of the good thing which they had introduced was that the state finances were linked also with the SEB finances, the Discom finances. And as per the Uday, whoever signed up, the SEB losses were to be counted with the, the state fiscal deficit as per the FRBM, and it has to be kept in limit. But what has happened is, being a concurrent subject, it is very difficult for center to impose, individual states about how much to charge their consumers. And at one end, as I mentioned, agriculture and probably, some segment of residential do not pay cost-reflective tariff, whereas commercial and industrial consumers in most of the states pay 8 rupee, 10 rupee tariffs, making them completely unviable for the Discom to increase it further. So there is a serious challenge in terms of how the state finances are, because of the core problem is this. But going forward, as Mr. Razdan was mentioning, the Electricity Act had good intention and brought in a lot of reforms, but the latest amendment to the Act also gives some hope. Biggest of them is probably, the smart metering program. Also linked to that will be most probably, if it is made prepaid, then part of the problem will be solved. Plus direct benefit transfer, which we have seen so successfully this government has done it in case of LPG subsidy. If that can be done with the farmers, the agriculture subsidy with the farmers get, which Andhra Pradesh has already announced in a pilot scheme, these two things will probably bring in a lot of fiscal discipline already to the finances of the Discom. But, if they are not implemented, as you rightly mentioned, all these Uday 2, all in some name or the other and form, it will keep coming back and state, then the finances of Discom will remain poor.
That Mr. Razdan, I'm going to come back to a very basic issue, which is ultimately it's all about the free power. And second issue is Bijli Ki Chori. So free Bijli and Bijli Ki Chori. Till the time these two basic things are not addressed, whatever we may talk, just going to be tinkering here and there. It's like saying, you're shifting the burden from the right hand to left hand. These two things are structural in nature, they're political in nature, and if they're addressed, the power sector will flourish, otherwise it will not.
I entirely agree with you and what Debashish has said. I think the problem that has been happening is that power has been treated as a political commodity. It is an economic commodity. Those who use it must pay for it. If the state wishes to subsidize or give free power, the state has to provide that directly to the distribution companies and not, I would say, this tariff mechanism has failed. Tariff has failed the industry. It is hurting industry because industry is not economic with those kinds of tariffs. So I would say that tariff could be in two parts. One is, you see, that is which is your actual tariff, and if you wish to add subsidy to it, then that subsidy has to be billed to the respective state government, which as a matter of policy demands it. And the regulators, I think, ought to have cancelled most of the licenses of distribution companies by now, which they have failed to do. Because Debashish rightly pointed out, you see, at the moment, to the best of my knowledge, industry accounts for 29% of your sales. Domestic is 28%, commercial is 9%, and agriculture is 22.4%. And I would say that there's a fear that the gap between the cost realized, the revenue realized, and the cost of supply may well, post this present COVID crisis, reach close to 1 rupee. The gap is expanding and the time is running out. The Bombay power outage that you briefly mentioned in the beginning needs, you see, it only shows that you need much more investment, which has to come out of this. If you create an islanding system, it has to be funded. The power demand has gone up. Maybe the islanding provisions were not adequate. So getting back to the point, I would say that yes, metering, prepaid metering, I've been shouting from the rooftops that when we had launched Saubhagya, we ought to have introduced it with prepaid metering. Otherwise, it could be Durbhagya for most of the distribution companies. I would, as I pointed out, I would just bring out.
Right. Fair point. Debashish, let's look at a very basic issue here. The power sector needs investment. Anybody who's gone close to investing in the power sector from the private sector has not really got bang for the buck. Whether it was in gas-based power plants, whether it is solar power plants, or even power utilities, because the flip-flop keeps on changing. With the exception of some PPAs, merchant power prices have also collapsed. So what is the attractiveness for anybody to invest in the power sector?
So if you look at the success of private investment in power sector, as Mr. Razdan was mentioning in the beginning in terms of achievement of the sector, the sector used to have 15-17% peak deficit. When private investment was allowed in the generation segment and the appropriate regime was introduced, we saw a rush of investment, and that has actually eliminated the power deficit, and which has immensely helped the economy, because earlier people were saying 1 to 2% of the GDP is being lost because of power deficit. But at the same time, what happened was, because there was a industrial slowdown already, it was happening, it became surplus, and a lot of these capacities got stranded and a lot of people lost their money. But one segment which I would say is still attractive, and it really still has the the interest of international investors, particularly, is the renewable segment, where we have seen, when this government came to power, we used to have 34 gigawatt of renewable capacity. Right now we have tripled it to 90 gigawatt. And the government has spelled out its intention to take it to 450 gigawatt. There is enough capital available, both equity and debt capital available in the international market. And we've seen most of this development of 90 gigawatt came from the private sector, and international money was involved. So that segment still remains attractive. But you rightly pointed out that, ultimately the power has to be channelized through the Discom. And if that the Discoms do not, two things. One is if they do not honor the contract and reopen PPS, and two, make delayed payment because of their precarious financial condition. That becomes a big dampener of private capital into the segment. And at the same time, government has announced, central government has at least cleared its intention that they would like more and more private participation in distribution segment also, and that itself will be a big long-term solution. And as you would have heard from Honorable FM's announcement a couple of months back, they would attempt the union territory privatization first. So these are all reform measures, at least symbolic measures, which will provide long-term solution and private capital for the sector.
Debashish, I would just, you mentioned
Well, Mr.
renewable
Razdan,
energy.
Debashish, gentlemen, gentlemen, I really need to take a break, but really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for your thoughts, and thank you for outlining the big picture for the power sector. Let's take a break. When we come back, N. J. Kumar of Prime Securities.